Hi, welcome to 20 Ideas using 20 fat quarters with GourmetQuilter. I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter, and we've started out this whole series. There's 20 parts to this series. There's 20 ideas because we started with 20 fat quarters. So we're doing a little pattern and a video each day for 20 days. I started with a stack of 20 fat quarters. I cut them into all sorts of shapes, and in the pattern there is a pattern if you're interested in more information in the pattern on GourmetQuilter.com. So in part one there was a chart as to how we're cutting up the fat quarters if you're going to do the same thing, and we had labels so that we could label everything and cut them to size. So all 20 fat quarters were cut the same so that we can then use the fat quarters throughout the projects. So most of the projects have most of the 20 fat quarters in them somewhere along the way. Plus we're also using up every small little piece, or pretty much every small little piece, of leftovers when we've done things. So today we're using some more leftovers. We're up to project number 15, and we're using some leftovers from project number 10. Again, we've already used some of them, but there's still more. So this was project number 10. It's a little quilt with the little boats on. And when we made the little boats, we cut away the little corners. So we're using some of those cutaway corners this time so that really there's no need for things to go to waste. They're most useful. So what we're making is this bag, just a tote bag, we're just making this little inset panel here using some leftovers. So these are the little cutaways from the boats all trimmed down to a usable size. And these strips here are also leftovers. Previously, I think it was project number 4 maybe, we did a little zip up pouch for maybe that would fit a tablet or something, and that had strips on it, and so there was some of those left. So that's what these strips in between are as well. So great for using up all these little bits and pieces. So I've gone ahead and I've cut everything out. So I've trimmed all my squares to the correct size to use, which is really good. And I've got some here. So we're making this little inset panel, as I've just said. So I've actually done most of the work. I'm making a little grey tote bag this time. So that's going to go in, but there's still a little bit more to go. So I just thought I'd show you how that all goes together. So I've got my little squares here ready, and we just need to join them into little columns of 3 to go up here. And then we're just putting a strip on the side, and then we've got another strip here of the bag colour. So I'm making the bag, the main fabric is this grey. So I've got a piece of that to go on the end so that we just make this whole panel that goes all the way across. And then there's a strip that goes on top, and I've got all this cut out ready here, so that strip is going to go on top. Then there's the main piece that goes below, and then there's a back piece as well, which is the whole. The back is quite plain, it's just that. And then we're going to pop a little piece of batting in, or maybe a largish piece of batting, because we're going to do some quilting on it in that state. So I can probably go ahead and join all these up. You don't really need to see me doing 1/4 inch seam allowances everywhere. I'm going to join the 3 into a little column. I'm going to join that to there, I'm going to join that to there, and I'm going to join that onto there. Then I'm going to join that onto there, because that's all going to fit. And that's all going to fit as well. And then this is going to be for the backing. So I'll go ahead and get all this done, and I'll get it onto the batting, and I can start quilting it as well, so that I can show you how all of that's done as well. So I'm just sewing the main panel to the main part of the front here. I've got the little top strip on already. And then after I've done this one, I'm going to sew the back part of the bag underneath that as well. So when I have done this panel, I'll just show you, I'll just press this seam. So I press the seams into the strips of all these little blocks. So that everything sits quite comfortably, because they're quite bulky, those little seams with the little points in them. So I've gone ahead and got that far now, and so now I'm going to stitch the back to it. Now we could have done the back all in one piece, but the centre seam that we're going to get in the underneath part here is going to be quite helpful when we do the corners. So I thought we'd have a seam there rather than not, and not have to worry about corners and things. So I'm going to sew those right sides together now, and then I'm going to layer it with the batting, but not anything else, just the batting, and do some quilting. So I'll go ahead and get that done next. So I've got it layered with the batting, and I'm just stitching either side of the panel all the way across the bag. And then we need to do something on the rest of the bag. I'll probably just do some straight lines, I think, but you could do pretty much anything you like whilst it's in this state. I might do some lines coming this way, maybe just straight down the centre here, just as I said, straight lines, parallel lines. I'll probably just come down. That's what I did on this one. I've just come down every couple of inches or so, I think, not too close together, just enough to hold it all together. So I've done just some parallel lines for quilting. So I've just used a cotton batting here, and it just grips the fabric nicely, so I didn't really need to particularly baste it or anything on something this small. You can often get away with little things like that. Cotton batting just grips, it's not fusible, it just hangs in there. So I'm just trimming off all the extra batting around the edge, because we're ready now to put the bag together. So we're just going to stitch the side seams, right sides together, just with a regular 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to make some of the little paper bag corners. So I'll go ahead and stitch the sides, and then I'll show you how to do the corners. So the sides are just a straight stitch all the way down both sides, and I'll show you how we're going to do the corners. So I've got my sides done, and I'm just going to do these paper bag corners. Not particularly hard to do, but larger than we've done on some other things. So this is where the seam in the bottom of the bag, the centre at the bottom, is quite helpful, because we've got side seams and we're just trying to match the seams up. So having a seam there does help us have something to match too. So what we're trying to do is open out. So we've got the flat bag here that I've just joined up. We're going to open out that corner, and we want to match that side seam to the bottom seam, which is on the fabric, not the batting. So you can open it out and just make sure. Often you can feel it, and once you've got it so that the seam itself is matching, then we can just flatten it out, and we can just sew. We're just going to sew across here, and what that gives us is a nice little sort of box corner at the bottom of the bag, and we have to do it to both corners. So, and I'm suggesting that we sew in probably a couple of inches from the point here. So we're coming along about here, I think, something like that, and it's just all the way across. So that ends up giving us a nice little base to our bag, and then we're going to trim that off. So again, we can just trim off with leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We don't need this little corner, and we've just got a nice little bag corner that when we push that out, it's just going to seat really nicely for the bottom of our bag. So I'll go ahead and get the other one done. The lining, we have to make up a lining pretty much to the same stage as this, just a box, and it also has the corners. So I've actually already gone ahead and done the corners on the lining. The only other difference is that when I sewed the lining, the two rectangles front and back together, I've left a gap in this bottom edge here, so that we can turn the whole thing out when we join it all together. And one other thing I did stitch on a pocket, because I thought it would be quite nice just to have a pocket inside the bag, and it was just a rectangle that was double that I've just stitched onto the back side of the lining. So nothing particularly hard about that. All the information is in the pattern for the pocket and everything as well. So I'll go ahead and get this other corner done, and then we've got to work on the handles, so I'll show you how to do those. So now we need to make a couple of handles. to go on the bag because the bag is looking pretty good, but it does need handles. It's not really a tote bag without handles, is it? So I've already done one, but I just thought I'd show you how I've gone about the other one. The other one, they started out with a whitish strip of fabric and a narrow strip of the batting, and I've just folded in, I've pressed in 1/2 inch along one edge here, and then this one I've just folded over with the batting so that that all sits covered in, and then we're going to just press this one over so that we can stitch down the middle and catch that in place. So we're going to do 3 lines of sewing, just straight sewing on the handle, so 1 down the middle and then 1 either side, like I've done on here, so if you can see that. So I've got 3 lines of sewing so that it catches that centre piece in. So I'll go ahead and get those done, and then we can just trim off the battings a little bit long. We can trim them so that they're all nice and even, and I'll show you how to put them into the bag. So I've got my handles, I've trimmed off just the excess batting, and make sure both your handles are the same length. They do need to both be the same length. It's quite helpful if they hang the same. So what I've done here is I found the centre of the top just by folding it so that the side seams are together and popping a pin in the centre. And then I'm actually going to use the markings on my board to help me position the handle. So I'm going to, and the handles need to go right sides together. If there's a right and a wrong side of your handle, put the right side of the handle facing the right side of the bag. And I'm just going to leave a gap here. I like to leave 6 inches between handles on a bag like this. So I'm just using these markings, as I said, on the board. And we need a pin that's going to pin for some reason. That's catching. That's better. So I'm just using these lines here because they're 1 inch apart, so I can see my centre line and I can see where 3 inches apart is. And I'll do the same over here. So I've come over this side 3 inches, so that leaves me 6 inches in between. And so now I'm just going to stitch that in place. So have the handle sit inside the bag, which is obviously inside out at the moment. I've already done the other one and it's just being held on. So I'm just going to do some holding stitching. So just within the seam allowance, you don't want to be seeing this line of sewing later on. So just it's only to hold it. It's not supposed to be anything other than a holding, so that when we go to put the lining in, the handle knows where to sit without moving. So I'm just going to stitch within the seam allowance here of both the handles, and then I'll come and show you how to pop the lining in. So I've got the handles just attached, just with that holding stitching, so it should all be looking pretty good. I've turned the bag out the right way. I've got my lining made to the same stage, but obviously not the handles, but I did put a pocket in there. So we want the bag out the right way and we want the lining inside out, and we're going to pop the bag inside the lining so that we can stitch around this top edge. And we've got these side seams that we can match here. You could have marked the centre of the side of the front and back as well if you wanted to help positioning, but I found that often the sides is enough. I am going to pop a couple of pins in just to hold it. And the other thing is just to make sure that we keep those handles straight when we're sewing them. They kind of want to move because they're only just held. We could put more pins in, but that's when I find pins get a little dangerous and you start putting them in other places. So you could put another pin in the centre bit here. It doesn't have to be in the exact centre, just somewhere to hold it. So we've got this, everything's right sides together now, just it's all kind of inside out. And now I'm just going to stitch around all the way around that top edge, but when I get to these handles, just remember to try and make sure they're still sitting straight. And often you can do that by feeling. You can just make sure before you get up to it that it's sitting straight. So I'll go ahead and sew all the way around the top here, including my handles, and I'll come and show you what to do with it next. So I've stitched all the way around that top edge. Now we just need to turn it out the right way. So we'd left a gap in the base of the lining, so we can pull it all through there now. This is kind of always the telling moment. Exciting, possibly just a little nerve-wracking sometimes, but no, it's going to work. So everything should come through. And then we're going to push the lining inside. But first of all, I'm just going to press the little gap so that it closes nicely. And you can hand slip stitch that, or you could machine stitch it closed. It just sits in the bottom inside of the bag, so it doesn't get seen at all. So just press in your 1/4 inch seam allowance so that it all sits nicely, because it kind of wants to mess up a little bit when we do that turning. It's a little unsettled and moves around a bit. So that's looking pretty good in there. So then we can push that inside the bag. We can stitch it closed as well. For the moment, we'll just do this. So pushing it inside, and then we're just going to press this top edge around, and then we're just going to do a line of top stitching up near that edge to hold the edge really nicely. Other than that, we're pretty much done. So I'm actually going to turn it inside out to do that again. These turning bags inside out. And I just want to press this top edge, so we just want that sitting as nicely as we can get it along the top, around the sides there, and then get these handles so that they're sitting out. So this lining, because the lining is thinner than the outside, which has got the batting to it, it tends to want to move up and take preference of position. So we need to encourage it not to do that. But it's going pretty well. There's this little bit to do as well. And then I can top stitch around that whole top edge. And we can see the bag all finished. So I think I'll probably leave it this way to sew it, because it's easier to sew inside the loop there. Probably not so easy for you to see what I'm doing. And I'm probably going to stitch it maybe about a generous 1/4 inch, possibly even as much as 3/8, so that it just holds all the seam allowance within the space from where we're top stitching. So I can go ahead and get this done, and then I can show it to you all finished. So as I said, just a generous 1/4 inch, possibly 3/8 inch. Just make sure that everything is sitting nicely as you go. Even though we've pressed it, it often wants to rearrange itself. So it's looking pretty good. You can turn it out the right way. And I think that is pretty much a little tote bag all done. And what a great way to use up all these little pieces that are left over from our other projects. So obviously this bag is not all fat quarters, but I thought it was a really good way of just showing you how you can use up some of your pieces, make up little panels into things when you've got little leftovers, and they just jazz up something else that's really kind of fun. So we've got that, we've got a little pocket inside. What more could you want in life? A nice tote bag with a pocket and a nice little decorative panel that nobody else necessarily needs to know is leftovers from another project, because really I don't think they are leftovers. I think that they are, that we made the boat quilt just so that we could have these pieces to make other things with. So that was it for project number 15. I will see you again with project number 16.